Grab a Bundy, then grab your sister, because this time on PlazmaTech, we're talking diesel. Well, welcome back to PlazmaTech, where we're giving you more of what you didn't ask for. We're back for a limited time only, so enjoy it while it lasts. This time around, we're talking about the kind of upgrades that we can help you out with on your diesel 4x4. Now, nowadays, more than ever, diesel 4x4s are extremely popular. In fact, they're the highest selling car in Australia. Wind the clock back 25 years ago, and Mum and Dad were rushing down to the dealership to get a brand new Holden Commodore or Ford Falcon. They were topping the sales charts. Bring it forward to today, and it's cars like the Toyota Hilux, Ford Ranger, Isuzu D-Max, Mitsubishi Triton, you know all the big names, they're sitting at the top of the sales charts. In fact, in the past 15 years alone, Toyota has sold an additional 10,000 Hiluxes per year than what they did back in 2006. What we're saying is the market for these vehicles are huge. They are the #1 seller. But there's a couple of problems with them, and we'll get into that in a second. First of all, let's talk about just exactly what diesel is and where it came from. So, a quick brief history of the diesel engine. Back in the late 1800s, a young German bloke by the name of Rudolf Diesel, he came up with the idea for a compression ignition engine. Now, this wasn't a new idea, and in fact, his whole purpose behind it was to try and replace the inefficient steam engine. A steam engine only converted a small amount of its heat energy into actual motion energy. Diesel's proposed engine would convert even more, just be way more efficient. His idea was to have it as a stationary industrial engine, and in fact, it wasn't even meant to run on diesel fuel. That actually didn't exist yet. The first prototype actually ran on petrol, and Diesel's idea was that it would run on peanut oil. It wasn't until the 1930s that diesel engines started to become a size and type where they could be used in cars, initially in trucks, and then in the 60s they started to appear in passenger sedans. Now, diesel fuel itself wasn't really defined until after World War II, when a bunch of regulatory bodies came together and decided what is and isn't diesel. And even then, today still, depending on where you are, what country you live in, your diesel could be different. Here in Australia, our diesel is a distillate. And if you ever pulled up to a servo in an old country town and there's a pump there that says distillate on it, now you know what that is. It's diesel fuel. Now, it's called distillate because it comes from a process called fractal distilling. Now, when they do fractal distilling, they're taking petrol and they're breaking it down by distilling it into its core components. Then they pick out a few of those components and turn it into diesel fuel. That's the real basic broad view of it. There's a hell of a lot more science involved than that. All right, let's get down to talking about today's four-wheel drive diesels. Now, I better make sure I put my hat on, because you can't be taken seriously when you're talking about four-wheel drives unless you got your wide brim hat. Actually, scratch that. None of that rubbish and nonsense around here. Real tech talk on PlazmaTech. Now, your current crop of modern diesel engines that you're going to find in all your popular dual cabs are pretty grunty units. Like, they're only small capacity and they're pumping out huge numbers. Now, let's compare these though to an old favorite. Up here on the PlazmaTech whiteboard, we have some stats. We have the current diesel champion from Nissan, the D23 Navara or NP300 with its 2.3 litre 4-cylinder diesel engine. And then we have the old king, the GU Patrol with the TD42 T3 engine. Most people will just know it as the TD42, but when it's a turbocharged version, it's a TD42T, and then the GU Patrol, it's a T3, because that's the third version of that engine. Now, in the D23 Navara, it's running the YS23DD-TT engine. This is an engine that Nissan has developed together with Renault, and it's used in a bunch of different vehicles, not just the Navara. You can even find it in Renault vans. YS23 DDTT is just what Nissan calls it. It goes by other names. Now the TD42 dates all the way back to the 80s, and it actually comes from Nissan's UD truck division, UD standing for United Diesel. It appeared in the Patrol in the GQ model, or the Y60, back in 1987, only in naturally aspirated form, well, in Australia anyway, and it is fairly old school. Now this thing is a cast iron block. The camshaft is in the block, the valves are activated by push rods, no overhead cams here. It is definitely old school, fully mechanically injected, no electronic control whatsoever, except for kind of on the very, very final versions found in really late GU Patrols. Now it's a 4.2 litre, 6-cylinder, runs a single turbocharger. The construction is all cast iron, real heavy cast iron. Diesel engines are typically a thicker, heavier casting than their petrol counterparts, and you can actually compare directly with a lot of the Nissan engines. The TD42 is very, very similar and a direct relative of the TB42, which is the petrol engine version. And then same deal with the RB engines and the RD28 diesel engine. Now, compression ratios. Here's where we're going to see a lot of difference between the new and the old. This jigger pushes 22.7 to 1 compression ratio. Now, of course, a diesel has to have a high compression ratio. It is a compression ignition engine. It creates ignition by compressing the fuel air mixture so much that it causes enough heat for ignition to happen. Now in these old school diesels, they need really, really high compression ratios to do that. If you look over here with the YS23 DDTT, it has a 15.4 to 1 compression ratio, so much lower. It makes things a little bit easier, but this engine is stressed a bit more in other ways, and we'll come to that right now. Turbo pressure. The TD42 is only making around about 8 to 10 PSI. Now for comparison, a Falcon XR6 Turbo, we typically see those do around about 7 to 9 PSI. The D23 Navara is making almost triple the boost, 20 to 23 pounds. Now it does have a twin sequential turbo setup, helping it to get there, but that's a big jump. But it needs that to be able to outgun the TD42 in terms of power. The old TD in stock turbo form makes 118 kilowatts, 330 Newton meters of torque. Now I know your cousin's mate's brother's sister's boyfriend coil cab makes 1,000 Newton meters at the tires. Okay, good for him. Now the YS23 in comparison, 140 kilowatts and 450 Newton meters from an engine that is basically half the capacity. In terms of efficiency, TD42 is 28 kilowatts per litre, the YS23 is 61 kilowatts per litre. Now here's where things get really interesting. The Patrol, 2.5 tonne. The Navara, 2.1 tonne, but both are rated to tow 3.5 tonne. Someone's telling porkies. But what we can see here from comparing the two is that whilst the newer engines are a lot more efficient, there's a lot of technology and design and know-how gone into making these modern diesel engines a lot more of an efficient beast, they are a lot more stressed. We can see that from the huge turbo pressures. We can see that from the high output per litre and from the demands placed on them. 3.5 tonne tow rating. So what does this all mean for you and your brand new dual cab that's sitting in the driveway? Well, from our experience, because these engines are so on a knife edge in terms of their tuning straight from the factory, at those kind of boost pressures and the size turbos they're running, they're pretty much at the end of their efficiency map or the compressor map straight off the showroom floor. This puts all sorts of pressure on all the components, but most of all, it puts pressure on the intercooling components, and that's where us, the intercooler guys, come in. This right here is an example of the standard intercooler hose you're going to find on your diesel dual cab 4x4. This particular example comes from a 2013-2014 Holden Colorado, and it's the cold side hose. So that goes from the intercooler to the inlet of the engine. You can see here, it's just standard rubber. Same as your radiator hose. It's pretty soft too. I can just grab that and press it with my hand. And in fact, this one has actually already split right here on the bend. That's pretty common for any of these factory intercooler hoses. Right where it bends, usually on the inside curve, is where you're going to find them to split. Now, if yours hasn't been replaced, it doesn't mean it needs to be straight away, although we do recommend it. But we've seen these hoses split a week after delivery from the dealer, and sometimes they can last for years. But particularly on the Colorados, these plastic elbows here that bolt straight onto the throttle body, once these start popping off, it's game over. So what can Plazmaman do to replace that? Well, in most cases, this is what we can supply. This particular example is a hot side hose for a Holden Colorado. So same vehicle we just saw that rubber hose from. And check this out. Much, much stiffer. This is 5-ply wire reinforced high temp oil resistant silicone. Now, why do you want to change that? Well, apart from the splitting, it's also more resistant to deforming because of that wire inlay inside. When you're putting your engine in your diesel 4x4 under heavy load, say when you're towing or you're going uphill, you're off-roading, something like that, particularly with a cold side hose, because this is on the vacuum side of the engine, so the engine is sucking air through here, what can happen is, under heavy load, that hose gets sucked in on itself, becomes a restriction. It's like trying to go for a jog while breathing through a drinking straw. With the various heat cycles that the engine goes through, it goes hot, goes cold, this rubber can go brittle as well, and that's usually why it splits. It won't deform under pressure, either get sucked in on itself on the cold side where it's under vacuum, or expand under pressure from the turbocharger when it's on the hot side. Now this is just purely a longevity thing. We have seen some improvement in performance from using these hoses, particularly when it comes to the BT50 and Ford Ranger with the 3.2 litre 5-cylinder diesel. Now this is the cold side hose that we supply for these, and this is a direct replacement for the factory hose. But on the hot side, our replacement is a short route. So normally the factory hose on the hot side, it comes off the turbo and then takes a big U-bend underneath some components and then comes back up to the intercooler. Ours comes straight across to the intercooler. That we've seen has improved response and a little bit of off the line and low end power, but nothing that you can really measure on a dyno. It's only measured through the butt dyno. Now for some other models, mainly the D40 series of Navara, we have to use aluminium hard pipes. This particular example here is for the turbo diesel V6, the STX 550, or if you've got a Pathfinder, it's the TI 550. Again, that's a Renault engine, 3 litre V6, pretty grunty. I remember driving those when they first came out, and I was pretty blown away with the rolling acceleration of those things, but they are notorious for absolutely hemorrhaging oil out of the factory hot side hoses. Modern diesel engines are what we call very heavy breathing. And what we mean by that is that they're pushing a lot of oil past the piston rings. Now, diesel engines are pretty oily and dirty to begin with, but these modern units are more so than what we've seen of others. And that, again, is to try and get these high power outputs, the tolerances on them are very, very tight. Now, what we see, especially on the Navara V6s, is on these pipes, they start to push oil out through them. And that's because of this circlip retainer arrangement. So instead of a hose like this, where it's just going to use a standard hose clamp to hold it on the turbocharger and hold it on the intercooler, this pipe uses a spring circlip and actually has an O-ring seal inside. Now on the factory hose, when those O-rings go, it's going to start pushing oil out. And while we've done everything we can to improve that coupling and improve that seal on here, eventually over time, those O-rings will wear out, you will need to replace them. Luckily, we sell replacements for those, but major improvement just by going to that. Now for your hard piping, we do this in the hot side on all your D40 Navara models or your R51 Pathfinder models for both the 2.5 litre 4-cylinder turbo diesel or the YD25 engine, and then we do them also for that 3 litre V6 model or the V9X engine. We supply these silicone hoses for a lot of popular 4-wheel drive models, including the Ford PX Ranger, and Mazda UP and UR BT50 in both the 3.2 litre and the smaller 2.2 litre. We've also just released a kit for the new PX Series 3 Ranger 2 litre bi-turbo for both the Raptor. We also supply hot and cold side hoses for the Holden RG Colorado. And again, we use silicon on the cold side hose for the D40 4-cylinder and V6 diesel. Now, as I said before, these hoses are really more of a reliability modification. You saw how soft the factory rubber hoses can be. These, much tougher. And if you're going to go out in remote areas, it's probably a good idea to upgrade these, or at least get a pair to have as a spare just in case. And also in most cases, our hoses are a lot cheaper than the factory examples, and they're usually in stock, unlike a lot of the factory versions right now. All right, let's talk intercoolers. Now, depending on what four-wheel drive you have, your intercooler setup on it will vary greatly. This example right here, this is from a Ford Ranger Raptor. You can see it's a pretty wide unit. Actually, where it's positioned in the car from factory, it actually does cop pretty decent airflow, but as always, there's improvements that can be made. Now, in other cases like ML and MN Tritons, it's a very small side mount intercooler, probably about half the size of this, and actually sits off to one side in the grille. Doesn't catch too much airflow, doesn't have a lot of capacity. In something like a Toyota Hilux, it's generally a top mount intercooler, and that's something we'll get to a little bit later on. Right now, let's focus on this unit here. So as I said, this is from Ford's Ranger Raptor, pretty popular beast. You've probably seen a lot of those around. You've probably seen it taking up all of your rear view mirror on the highway. But the intercooler that it's equipped with from factory is semi-decent. But as I said, you can make improvements. One of the key improvements that can be made is with the end tanks. Now, as you can see on this factory unit, they're made of plastic and they're held onto the core by this pressed steel ring here. Now, what we find in a lot of cases with this type of design is that over the years, as this plastic goes through multiple heat cycles, as does the cooler core, sometimes these fingers here can start to separate, and your first sign of a boost leak is actually going to be like an oil stain down in the corner. Particularly if you have a Navara STX 550, that is going to be a common fault. The intercooler design is the same as this one. Now, this beast of a unit here is our Plazmaman Pro Series intercooler for the Ford Ranger and Mazda BT50 3.2 litre. This is actually pretty much the same intercooler that we use for the Ranger Raptor 2 litre. What changes is some of the mounting. The core size and end tank design is pretty much exactly the same. Now, over the factory intercooler, what we've improved is the core size, the thickness. We've got larger tubing and more internal finning. This gives it greater volume and better heat exchange. And that's really important in these four-wheel drive utes, especially if you're putting them under a lot of load. You've got them fully loaded up to go away on a camping trip. You've got the boat on the back. You're really using that 3.5 ton tow rating to its max. On the factory intercooler, once you threw the boat on the back, it was heat soaked straight away. There was that much load and strain on the vehicle that the factory intercooler just couldn't cope with the pressure. And once we switched to this unit, well, that all went away. Because of the extra volume in the intercooler and the extra finning, it meant that it could handle a lot more airflow and it could heat exchange more efficiently and quicker. And that's really the key reason to be upgrading the intercooler in your four-wheel drive ute. Now, naturally, there are plenty of performance benefits, especially once you start throwing a tune at it. You're going for a turbo back exhaust. But again, it's really just a great reliability modification. And if you are going to be doing a lot of towing, you're going to drive it around Australia, this is a modification to have. Now, aside from this unit here for the Ford Ranger and Mazda BT50s, we also, again, do a very similar one for the 2 litre bi-turbo Ranger and Ranger Raptor. We've also got Pro Series intercoolers for the D23 Navara, the D40 Navara, both 4-cylinder and V6. We also do one for the D22 Navara ZD30 models. We've got one for the MN Triton, and it can also be used on the ML, but contact us for more details. And then we do one for the RG Colorado as well, and we're adding new models all the time, including one that we're just getting set to release for the N70 Hilux. Let's go check that out.
G'day, my name's Steve and I'm from AECO 4x4, and Plazmaman have bought their Toyota Hilux with their brand new front mount intercooler kit. So we're going to see what sort of intake temps we get after we tune this car and also when it's standard. So let's have a look.
AECO 4x4 can be found in Riverstone, in the northwest outskirts of Greater Sydney, where they perform all kinds of 4x4 performance upgrades, from simple diesel tunes to pre-delivery coil conversions on 70 series Land Cruisers.
All right, so with our diesel tuning, we like to run the car with absolutely no fans at all. And what this simulates is worst case scenario. So you're towing heavy or you're on the beach, full load environment with minimal or no airflow. So basically we're gonna run this up now standard and get our baseline run. And then we're gonna load our base file into this, tweak it from there, and we'll see the intake temps difference between the standard and the tuned version. And we'll also be able to see where the benefits are going to mostly lie with going to the front mount intercooler over the factory top mount. So intake temps on a diesel are a lot more critical than a lot of people think. The actual combustion happens with pressure and heat. So obviously if the heat that's going into the engine is substantially hotter than what the engine would actually need, you actually end up with a pre-ignition event, and basically the engine's trying to fight itself to run, which obviously is not economical or efficient. So with a Plazmaman front mount intercooler kit, we're able to test and see that the intake temps are significantly lower, come with efficiency and economy, and you will end up with not only a reliable car, but you'll have a car that makes more power and is able to tow and do all the hard stuff that you probably shouldn't be doing with a tuned top mount intercooler setup. So we'll run this now with a tuned file and we'll see what the benefits are in real life.
On an otherwise stock engine, the Plazmaman intercooler provides a major increase in reliability and stability of air intake temps, especially when towing. However, it's with a performance tune that we really see the capabilities of our intercooler kit shine. With proven performance technology, your Hilux will be ready to tackle any task.
All right, so we've now completed our tuned testing of this car. We made another 200 Newton meters, which is very significant. We saw a boost increase of about 6 to 7 PSI as well. Obviously, when you compress air, it heats up. So this is the part where a good intercooler really pays for itself. We were able to do full load dyno runs back to back with no fan, and we only saw a 6-degree rise in intake temp from ambient, which is massively impressive. So what we're going to do now, just because I'm a little bit excited about the results that we're already seeing, is we're going to do 1 minute of full load testing on the dyno at 60 kilometers an hour, and we'll be able to see at the end of it what sort of increase in intake temp we see with no fans and full load. So this would be like you're towing a 3-ton trailer. So we'll do that now and see how we go. All right, so we just completed the full load testing. Over the minute of full load, we only saw an intake temperature increase of 8 degrees, which it honestly blows my mind because I've never seen one that is able to perform like that under such heavy load conditions. So as far as a front mount intercooler kit goes for the Toyota Hilux, I think we've got a new favorite. I'd like to thank Plazmaman for coming out and allowing us to actually test this, because very rarely do we get to actually be involved in the testing of these. And it's been great to see how this performs over the standard top mounts that we generally see, as well as other front mount brands. So super impressed. The fitment looks easy. Everything's been really thought out in terms of fitment and mounting. All of your horns and everything don't have to be relocated like other brands. Very minimal cutting to make this kit actually fit, and the actual presentation of it, the engine bay looks brilliant. So if you're in the market for a front mount intercooler, I'd probably highly recommend the Plazmaman front mount intercooler kit.
All right, so you've seen just what kind of improvement changing up your intercooler on your stock standard four-wheel drive can do. That's the Plazmaman difference. That's the difference just making these key simple changes can do for your diesel. As you've seen, these modern diesel engines, they're pretty stressed straight from the factory. They're doing an awful lot to give you the very best they can. Why don't you give them a little hand as well? Well, that'll do it for this episode of PlazmaTech. We got to get ready to head up to Cape York, so we'll catch you all next time. You want to get some more tech info, check out our other episodes on YouTube, and if you need a hand with anything, hit us up, sales@plazmaman.com.